today I will be interviewing David Goldberg, who is a civil rights lawyer, and he is toured for the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. So welcome, David. We're going to be talking about the Supreme Court nomination that President Trump has nominated. ACA has opposed the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh. Why is it important to the disability community about the Supreme Court?
That's a great question, Liz. The Supreme Court is often the place that civil rights are defined. For people with disabilities, one great example is the ADA. The Supreme Court was the one in 1999, under the Olmstead decision, that said that people with disabilities had a right to live in the community and not be segregated into institutions. And until then, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act by itself, didn't give that right to people with disabilities until it was the Supreme Court that said they had that right under the law.
How can the Kavanaugh nomination affect the ACA?
That's a good question. The ACA is the Affordable Care Act, and some people know it as Obamacare. The most important thing about the Affordable Care Act is that it made big changes for insurance companies and for people to make it easier for them to get and keep insurance. The biggest one is that insurance companies couldn't keep people with disabilities or other people with health conditions from getting insurance that covered them for pre-existing conditions. So that meant that everybody could then get insurance. Without that, people were getting excluded from insurance, particularly people with disabilities. So what that has to do with Judge Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court is that when the law passed, people were suing to try and stop it from taking effect. Judge Kavanaugh is now a member of the Circuit Court, and when that case was before his court, he voted against the Affordable Care Act and said it was unconstitutional. And Congress could not require people to get insurance, something called the individual mandate, and the whole law would have failed. And he lost that case. He was what's called the dissent, meaning that the other judges outvoted him. And then the case was appealed to the Supreme Court, which made the ultimate decision. And the Supreme Court, by only one vote, upheld the law. And so now he's been nominated to replace one of the judges on the Supreme Court. One of the lawyers who worked for the justices on the Supreme Court even said that Judge Kavanaugh's opinion to strike down the Affordable Care Act was so thorough that it was the guide that the 4 dissenters who wanted to declare the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional, Judge Kavanaugh's opinion was their guideline, their roadmap for how to do it. So if he's on the court, if his nomination goes through and he's confirmed by the Senate and is a member of the Supreme Court, and another case on the Affordable Care Act goes to the Supreme Court, which is pretty likely, then he will almost certainly vote against it again. And if he leads the Supreme Court to strike it down, millions of people will almost certainly lose their health care, and the people who will suffer first and most, and worst will be people with disabilities.
What does unconstitutional mean?
What that means in this case is that Judge Kavanaugh said that Congress didn't have the authority to pass this law. And what he meant was that the specific powers that Congress had under the what's called the spending clause and the taxation clause of the Constitution did not give Congress the power to pass a particular part of the Affordable Care Act called the individual mandate, which is the part that says that everybody has to get health insurance, and if they don't, there would be a fine in their IRS taxes. And The big issue with that is that if there isn't an individual mandate, then the entire law ends up going away. And every time a state has tried to pass something that had universal care in it, meaning everybody gets insurance, if there isn't some kind of mechanism that sort of makes people get insurance or has a big incentive to do it, like what's in the Affordable Care Act, the law always fails. Because what happens is young, really healthy people feel like they don't need insurance, so they won't buy it if there isn't some sort of incentive or penalty like the Affordable Care Act has, like the individual mandate. And then only people who are older or who have health conditions or have disabilities will buy the insurance, but the insurance companies will say that, well, we don't have young healthy people, so these other people, they're costing us more money, so we've got to raise the rates way too high.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, David.